morning. Good morning to our audience. We're going to give it just a minute for some people to log in, make sure the connection works, and then we'll get started. Bear with us just a minute.
Are you okay?
Good morning to everybody who's just joining us. Just giving it just a minute for some more people to log in before we get started. All right, ready to roll. So thank you for joining us this morning. The topic of today's webinar, as I'm sure you've seen, is how to identify, evaluate, and manage distributors in Latin America. This is a process that can be quite a challenge, even within your own home country. So entering a new market with language barriers, cultural differences, and potentially conflicting methods of operating is even a greater challenge for foreign sellers. So the goal then of this webinar is to present the audience with the experiences, examples of 3 companies that have had success in the region in dealing with the various processes involved with distributors, and to provide strategies, tips, and tools to help guide other businesses when it comes to identifying, evaluating, and managing these partners. So following the webinar, we will be writing up a blog that summarizes the main points that are discussed here today. And we'll send it out along with the recording of the event to all who registered. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Then we'll dive into the questions. If anyone has questions that arise during the discussion, please submit them in the chat, and we'll address them in the last 10 minutes or so of the hour this morning. First panelist, we have David Light, who is the COO of Agricultural Exports, also known as AgEx. David Light is the Chief Operating Officer of AgEx, which is a leading supplier of lab diets for medical research animals throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as a global supplier of a broad selection of agricultural products globally. AgEx is also an active exporter of fertilizers to Latin America. David's focus is to manage and maintain relationships with the existing customers while focusing on the growth of AgEx's portfolio, primarily throughout LatAm and the Caribbean. David brings strong financial management and leadership experience to this role. Next up, we have Konstantin Jessen, who is the founder and CEO of Decada, which is a beverage company, as well as Jessen Fruits, which is a fruit service agency. Konstantin is a German entrepreneur who is currently living in Hamburg after having lived and done business in Colombia for more than 6 years. He arrived in Colombia in 2013 and founded his first company at the age of 23. Since then, he launched the brand Decada in 2016, which is the first ever organic certified beverage in Colombia, and Jessen Fruits, an agency for fruit importers and exporters, in 2020. Finally, we have Daniel Breitenmoser, our very own CEO and co-founder of Ongreso. He's a Swiss entrepreneur with a passion for Latin America. He's made it his mission to increase the awareness of Latin America's potential with international companies and investors and facilitate their expansion to the region. In 2010, he co-founded Ongreso, which is a market expansion consultancy with subsidiaries and network partners in Europe and throughout Latin America. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and I think we can dive into our first question. In the topic of entering a new market, once you've decided to enter that new market and have conducted the necessary research on market viability, competition, etc., where do you start looking when looking for a local distributor? What are the resources, contacts, and processes do you use to identify potential options? Maybe we could start with Konstantin for this first question.
Yes, sure. Like
I have most of the experience I have is based on the beverage company that we founded in Colombia, and for us, the search of new distributors was an ongoing process. I was in charge of sales as well, so it was really my task to try to always explore new regions. And in those regions, first of all, we needed a regional distributor that could take in our beverages in their portfolio, try to sell it to their clients, and then from our point, try to support them whenever they had it in the portfolio to do the best performance possible. So we actually, before going to the identification of distributors, for us, it was very important to see which region we wanted to enter. And then when we had taken the decision, for example, we started in Medellin, and then the first step was going to the capital, to Bogota. So whenever we took that decision to go and explore to Bogota, there were different options of identifying the possible distributor. I think first of all, there's an online research, which is today's daily work. Is just to try and find anything online, which is fairly difficult a lot of times in Latin America. So this was never the most successful branch for us. The second one is really a search on the field. So it was really me going to Bogota, trying to connect to people, going into stores and asking them where they order their beverages to try to find, for example, a beverage distributor, and then have recommendations from that part. And besides that, we had a lot of network and general contacts of other companies. For example, a friend of mine had a chocolate distribution in Colombia. So we asked them who they work with in Bogota, who can they recommend to us maybe. So it was recommendations, it was some online search, but which was not very successful in our case. And the third one is really going there, being there, trying to live there and try to make the connections to the big and successful companies there.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. If you have boots on the ground, those are good methods of going about it. David, what about you for AGEX? What resources, contacts, processes did you use to identify potential options?
We use local consultants that are in country in conjunction with. We're fortunate in the United States where we have foreign commercial service offices, so we can ask them to sort of do a distributor search for us. We also have overseas trade representatives from the state of Pennsylvania who could do the same thing. And then in conjunction with the local in-country consultants, what we try to do is see if there's a common name or a common theme popping up amongst the research, as well as, again, try and do some internet research and that type of thing. But coming at it cold without being able to go live in the country, the local consultant partner is indispensable.
Thanks, David. Daniel, what about from your perspective as a market entry consultant?
Yeah, we are being contracted quite a lot by foreign companies to do exactly that, to find adequate local distribution partners. And so this is a service that we offer, and we have kind of developed a certain methodology that is not that different from what Konstantin said, but obviously we always try to, like, depending on the industry, to identify what are trade associations, multipliers, industry publications, where you can get a good overview. But then I agree with what Konstantin said. Usually online research doesn't really get you very far. That also has to do that many distributors, even though some of them are pretty large companies, they have a very limited online presence. Sometimes they have very rudimentary websites that don't really show everything they've got. So to get a real feel for which ones are the really important players in a certain industry, you have to start talking to those companies in person, Maybe you can visit them. Maybe there are trade fairs that are pretty productive usually. And the other thing is just the groundwork, like doing a lot of phone calls, interviewing people, if possible, meeting them if they're in the big cities where we have a presence. And then also what Konstantin said, like you start somewhere and then you're being maybe given names or introduced to other people, and there the ball starts rolling and you get further and further into the industry and find the real important pieces of the puzzle.
Definitely a time-consuming process, certainly. Second question, what are the most important factors or characteristics that you look for in a distribution partner in Latin America? And are these different in any way from maybe partners that you work with in other parts of the world? David, you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. One of the biggest things that we look for in a partner in Latin America is experience importing similar products into the country, and them being able to demonstrate the capabilities that they have knowledge of bringing a product into the country, and knowledge of the registration and the sort of legal framework that needs to be obeyed to be able to sell the product in that country. I mean, we want the same, we want similar traits with any of our distributors, such as, proven successful sales channels, knowledge of product or parallel products, obviously good credit. We found that the language barriers, it's great if you have someone speaking your native tongue, but we have not found that to be a major problem, because in cases where English is not common, we've been able to arrange a translator, or they can arrange a translator, or both. But I would say that was the biggest thing is we want somebody who understands how to get our product into the country. I mean, if we can't get it through customs and into the country, it doesn't do us any good on how much they can sell.
Certainly. Daniel, what about for Ongreso clients? What have you noticed that maybe in your conversations with them, what is the common thread that they seem to look for in distribution partners that makes the relationship successful?
I mean, obviously, at first you look at some hard facts, like does a company meet the basic requirements that the client is looking for, when it comes to, do they cover the whole national territory? Are they in the right sales channels? Do they service the right sales? Do they have a sales force large enough to meet the expectations of our client, etc.? But then besides that are two factors, and I think David already touched on them. One is everything that is surrounding the actual distribution, and I agree that the importing part is extremely critical. That is a make or break factor. The other thing is registration, so that also has a lot to do with the trustworthiness. We have seen numerous cases over the past 12 years since we have started, of companies like selling products that need registration in country XYZ, and they leave that part to a distributor which they don't really know, and then the distributor actually registers the product in his name, and that gives him a de facto exclusivity for up to 10 years, depending on the product. And if then the relationship doesn't work out, you are tied to a company you don't want to be tied to, and that can cost you time, money, resources, energy. And the other part, that obviously depends a bit on the type of product that you sell. I mean, it's the language and the cultural aspect. David says in their case, it's not that important. But if you sell more complex investment goods, machinery that needs a lot of after sales service, a lot of training that is maybe being integrated in larger installations, there I believe the cultural and the language barrier can really be a huge detriment to establishing a successful relationship. So we usually look at that part as well. From both sides. Does our client have the internal resources? Does he have someone that speaks the language and that maybe has spent some time in that part of the world. And on the other hand, does the distributor maybe have someone that speaks English or speaks the language of our clients, to make sure that at some point, once we kind of take a step back in the initial process of bringing both together, that they can then continue working bilaterally and directly with each other.
Thanks, Daniel. And then Constantine, anything to add as far as characteristics to look for? And then also the piece about partners from different parts of the world. Do you notice any differences between distributors or partners between Europe and Latin America?
Yes. First of all, like the beverage company Decada that we created is like a social business with an innovative concept and characteristics. So it wasn't that easy selling in general, because it was organic. It's the first organic certified drink ever of Colombia. So we had to do a lot of teaching. What is organic? Why is it important? And why is it worth to spend a little bit more on a product than on common other goods? So that was always a big challenge. And that's why it was for us always a challenge to find the right distributors. And I think it is that because it's not such a commodity that you just find your Ecky's big company that can sell it and sell it like any other product that they're selling already. We really needed distributors that believe in it, that think that it's good, they know how to, and they are like up for putting the effort in it and doing the extra work also on the commercial side. So for us, it was really about finding a distributor that has the same beliefs, that's really trying to create something different in the market and sees it also as an opportunity to have something completely different than what the market offers. So for us, it was very important that, of course, it's a serious company. It believes in the same values that we have. And for us, a lot of times it was actually because it's still a massive consumption good, a beverage. So we had to scale up. And as a small company, as a startup with a low financial situation, you don't have the same possibilities as the big brands that you just buy and you pay a big distributor. So in our case, it was a lot of times really of thinking outside the box, trying to find someone. Like if you just go to the general Ecky's beverage distributor, they won't want it because they are looking for easy selling products. They're not looking for something that's a lot of effort. So for us, it was more actually thinking about distributors that are that might be exactly the right one to sell an organic product, but maybe they don't sell drinks yet. So we were actually selling really well with the company that is selling normally just pastries, so sweet donuts and stuff like that. They had a huge distribution nationwide, but they didn't have any drinks with it. So they were very interested to be able to offer something of their snacks and have for first time also a beverage with it. And that sold very well and was for us something, was thinking outside the box, not looking for the common distributor, but looking for someone that is actually not selling drinks yet and convince them. So that's the one part. And then the second part is really the international one. And generally on the business side, after 3 years selling in Colombia, we started exporting to Europe. And in Europe, it was pretty much the same situation. We always tried to look outside the box. We always tried to get into distributors that are not the common beverage distributors that are already selling 100 beverage brands. And now we are number 101. We're looking for special distributors that might be interesting in something special, or that they are very open for a drink. And for example, in Europe, we looked for fair trade companies that are selling fair trade products. And a lot of times they hadn't sold any fair trade drinks until now, and that sold pretty well. So it was pretty much the same situation, trying to think outside the box, trying to get around the very, very common commercial way. But of course, there's huge cultural differences. So it's very different. The whole identification, like identifying the right distributor and the evaluation of it is completely different in Latin America than it is in Europe. I don't know if you want me to go on about this, because I think it's a complete different point, and maybe we should all talk a little bit about that, about the cultural differences between where we are from and then selling in Latin America.
Certainly. Yeah, no, I definitely want to get around to that. And I kind of want to come back to you as well with the next question. As you mentioned,
go ahead.
Sorry
if I interrupt you. I think David has a follow-up comment that he would like to make to that before we change the topic.
One of the other characteristics that we very much look for in a distributor also is we don't want the tier 1 top distributors in those countries. We want the guys who are below them who aspire to be those distributors. We want people who are going to be hungry to sell our product and have our product represent a new product offering for their distributor to give them a competitive advantage against the bigger, more bureaucratic and corporate distributors.
And maybe if I can make a comment as well, like what you just said, absolutely. We see that in quite a few clients of ours that have a certain size, that are not huge, but they're growing, and they're, as you put it, David, they're hungry, and they look at a distributor that has the same mindset. And the other part that just came to mind is what is also extremely important in Latin America is that many distributors, they sell a lot of Chinese products. And if you come as a US or a European supplier of a premium product in the same category, there is a real danger that such a distributor will use your brand as kind of a quality symbol, but they won't sell a single unit of your product. They just shelf it and use it because it looks good on their website, but they will actually sell the more low-cost versions of the Asian manufacturers or producers. And that's also something that you need to look at really carefully, like what is the existing portfolio of a potential distribution partner.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for those additional comments, guys. Constantine, you were mentioning that as a small company, it can be difficult to find a distributor to pick up the product or who matches your values, as opposed to, even for some of the bigger companies, that can still be difficult, but much more so a smaller company. So to kind of follow up on this topic, we've all been burned at some point by partners, clients, employees, other connections that we tried to evaluate, didn't quite pan out, and that burns our time and resources as well as theirs. So my question is, once you've identified potential distributor or distributors that meets that given criteria, what does your due diligence process entail in order to vet those candidates and basically check to make sure they are who they say they are, they can fulfill the terms of agreement, they do match the values that you mentioned? What does that due diligence process look like?
Yeah, as a small company, it's very limited, like the official bureaucratic steps that you can take. It's really about your guts. It's really about sitting down with those distributors and getting to know them personally, seeing their facilities, seeing what is their portfolio, how much are they really believing in your product, and how much do we believe that they can do a good job at it. And each new distributor that we all know, I guess, is an invest in time, is an invest in energy, is an invest in money, because you have to give them free product and everything. So it's also, for a small company, very important not to have too many bad experiences with distributors, because you're relying on them. But at the same time, you have to be pretty opportunistic, because each one can also overperform, So for us, we were pretty open for it, and it was one of my key tasks was to get new distributors for us and explore new regions. A lot of times, if it's a little bit bigger player, they want exclusivities, and so it's always a process of negotiating and trying to get into that position, because in our case, it was very important not to give away the exclusivity to some locale that's really not selling well, and then you're tied to that one. So that's how we communicated it all. A lot of times we did challenges for them and like goals, selling goals, high selling goals, that they can work for it and earn an exclusivity in their region or in the country. But the numbers have to work, and until then, it's just a very big risk. And for the international expansion, for example, that was a key point, because we were used to just giving a goal that you can earn your exclusivity. But if you do international expansion, a lot of times it doesn't work like that, because the company on that level, a lot of times is not open for putting that much effort and risk into a new product and brand that they have to create in the market. And you still, as a brand owner, have the opportunity of, after 3 years, say, no, I'm going to do it now by myself, which a lot of times happen in the market. So there's some different processes. For us, the due diligence itself was really based on personal experiences, personal communications, personal visits, and trying to really get a feeling for the company. Of course, try to talk to some of their clients and see if it's a good provider, if they're on point with the deliveries, if they're owing money or anything. But in Latin America, for our case, it has been very difficult to do like an official due diligence and see if they're really gonna pay, if they're really in a good financial situation. For us, it would have been a huge investment, and a lot of times we made the decision that it's not worth it.
Understood. Yeah, David, what about for AgX? What does the due diligence process look like?
It's a evolving process at this point, but we work a lot with in-country consultants, relying on sort of whatever process they have in place to do some screening. We will also do a background check through a approved sort of credit bureau report by XM Bank, since we have that luxury being in the United States. We do like references from the distributor that we can follow up on. And for us, at least initially, from a payment standpoint, whenever we enter into a new relationship, it's always payment in advance. So, I mean, if that's a non-starter from the very beginning to us, that sort of indicates that they may not have the financial capabilities that we're looking for. The other thing that we kind of look for is their staff capable of understanding our product and converting that product into their market? You know, I mean, if we're, you know, to be simple, I mean, if we're selling steak and the whole staff is vegan, do they really understand our product? You know, but we're selling fertilizer. Is there a chemist? Is there an agronomist? Is there somebody like that who can translate it to the customer?
Absolutely. Definitely important. Daniel, what else have you seen as far as due diligence processes for vetting distributors?
I think, I mean, what Konstantin said before, it depends a lot on the size of the company. I mean, if you're a small company, you cannot spend a huge amount of time and money doing like a formal due diligence. What we do is for our clients is we check the like publicly available sources to do kind of a financial and a legal due diligence. Does the company have a good financial standing? If there are local credit bureaus, etc., you could consult. Are there any pending lawsuits of that company? That is a part of the due diligence process we do. And then the other part is obviously the reputational check by talking to industry insiders, asking them, hey, what is the reputation of that company in the market? If it's a larger player, if it's maybe also sometimes already planned that a initial client distribution relationship could or should evolve into maybe potentially a joint venture, then maybe companies decide to already go take it a step further and do a more thorough due diligence process. But then that also requires the distribution partner to really open their books and agree to a due diligence. And then besides that, I mean, obviously the human resources that are available in the company, what David mentioned is key to make sure that the know-how is in place. But that's the more on the operational commercial side.
Definitely. Daniel, I'm going to come back to you on this one. This next one, just to talk about common mistakes that maybe companies make. We've all made some errors, but when it comes to distributors and choosing and managing these distribution partners in foreign markets, what do you think are the most common mistakes that you've seen companies make during this process?
The most common one is a lack of research. Without any doubt, in my experience, companies just choosing the first best candidate that crosses their path. Many of them they meet at some international trade fair. Someone visits them at their booth and says, "Hey, I distribute your kind of products in this and this country." The company doesn't have a presence there yet, and then they think, well, we don't have one, so it's better to have someone than to have no one. But that can be a big mistake because it can cost you a lot in resources, in time, and it can even cost you, in the worst case, your reputation if you work with the wrong distribution partner in a certain market. So if you get off on the wrong foot in a market, that can really do a lot of damage to your company. So I always suggest or recommend that a company takes the time to first do the proper research, then do the due diligence, and then also visit those the best candidates and to get a personal feel. And I think that's not only true for the client but also for the distributor. Latin America is known to be a very relationship-based business environment. So spending some time together, maybe go have dinner together, or maybe even spend a weekend with the distributor and really get a personal connection going. I think that takes you a long way to already set the tone for a future collaboration. And the other part is, or the other mistake that we see quite a lot is companies not being sufficiently aware of the cultural differences and trying to manage the distributors as they would manage a distributor in their own country. In Latin America, it is important to maintain a close contact. And for example, written communication, emails, etc., they're not really that reliable, especially if they're written in a different language other than Spanish or Portuguese. Sometimes people don't feel confident enough to answer in English, for example, and then they prefer not to answer instead of answering in a lacking language. So it is important to keep communication going, be it by phone calls, video calls. That I think that has become much more common since COVID. It is important to visit regularly, and it is important to maintain that personal relationship that you kicked off, hopefully in the beginning. And I think that's really important. That's what a lot of companies underestimate and don't do enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Constantine, over the years that you've lived and worked in Colombia with distributors, are there any things that you've corrected in your own business, things that you've adapted and moved forward that you've seen could be helpful to other companies in this process?
In terms of mistakes?
In terms of mistakes and growth.
Yeah. I totally agree with everything that Daniel said. I think it's very important to be there, be present, and really get to know the different companies that you're trying to start a business relation with. Besides that, I think it's from a business point of view, but also from a very commercial point of view. It's a lot of times companies lack of different opportunities and options. So then they go with the first best. And I think it's very important to make a broad research, talk to as many companies, as many options as possible at the same time, to really get an idea of what is good and what is bad. Because if you're just talking to one, and it's very hard to get a feeling for it. Is it good? Is it low? Do they have a lot of employees? Do they have a big warehouse? Do we trust them in general? But if you're talking to 10, 15, 20 options at the same time, you will very easily get a good feeling for, oh man, with that one, we have very good communications. He's answering very fast. They are very good. They have great portfolio. And you see a big difference very fast if you put the effort in it, the time and energy in investing in time and talking to and doing a really broad research of it. The second point I wanted to add is with the second company I'm managing, which is Yes and Fruits, which is like we're working as fruit agents between importers and exporters. We mainly work with big import companies here in Europe that contract us to help them sourcing. So we talk to producers of fruit in Latin America, and we need to find something a lot of times for the importers. And sometimes they have so much urgency that they need, I don't know, for example, a container of watermelon that needs to go on the sea next week on the ocean. So when the urgency rises, the risk goes also up, and their open mind for taking risk is also a little bit higher, and we can't avoid the topic of having fraud that's everywhere in the world. So you really have to watch out. And when urgency rises and importance rises, a lot of times importers are, not a lot of times, but we have seen the cases where they're just that opportunistic, that they're saying, okay, we need that. They're offering us something without doing the right due diligence. They're even sending anticipated money before seeing anything. They haven't visited that company. They haven't seen anything else besides maybe a homepage. They're sending money over there, and they're never receiving any kilo of fruits. So I think that's something which is not very common. It just happens in very extreme situations. But from a general point of view, that's completely avoidable. And that's where you really need, I think, in that origin, a partner, if it's a consultancy or an own employee that is there, or that at least travels there and gets to know them. If you can't even take that time, I think it's better to not make the business at all. It's a recommendation in general.
Yeah, those are two very good points. The experience, the more touch points and conversations you have, the more your experience and your perspective is going to broaden. And then, yeah, absolutely, in Latin America especially, but kind of anywhere, that that urgency can create some less than ideal situations where we make emotional decisions. David, on your end, anything to add as far as lessons learned working in the region, and maybe mistakes that you've seen have been made?
Yeah, I mean, and this has to go more with managing the distributors, but personally, the mistakes that I've made are just miscommunication mistakes, either not communicating enough or something being sort of lost in translation from a timing standpoint or a responsibility of the party standpoint. I mean, because my recommendation is I believe in complete transparency. And I mean, you can be completely transparent without giving away your trade secrets. But, defining so it's clear to both parties what your responsibility is, what my responsibility is. The other thing that we've started noticing recently, as the relationship deepens with the distributor, is, we're noticing that they may not do certain things as well as we might be able to do for them from this end. And then it's just a matter of delicately sort of communicating that to them without being critical. That, hey, have you thought about maybe we could do this for you, and that would speed the process up or make it more efficient, or something along those lines. I mean, like, we just recently identified an opportunity in Mexico where we can actually probably drive sales to our distributor better than they are currently doing themselves. So we're sort of implementing a process for that without sort of being critical of that distributor.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a good point. As far as the loss in translation and the responsibility of each party, that's something we've seen, is that even if you speak the same language, things can still kind of get lost in translation as far as what is the understanding here. So being very explicitly clear and outlining what is the responsibility of each party, I think goes a long way and is essential to being on the same page.
Well, Joe, to give you an example real quick, the biggest miscommunication we've had has to do with Incoterms and the payment, and when the payment terms start. And our partners in Latin America seem to think that it's when they receive the product, where the Incoterm may dictate that it's when it's on the boat. But if you're giving somebody 30 days and it's on the boat for 21, those miscommunications. So we've tried to manage that going forward much clearer, even spelling it out on the invoice with dates and that type of thing.
Yep. And tough
and
to get
maybe
all
something
those.
I can add about that is I 100% agree with everything that David said about this. And I think one of the very key points, and I don't want to be too philosophical, but I think in general, also in relations of human beings, you cannot ever underestimate the point of and the importance of communication. So I think communication is key. If you have good communication, everything will be resolved. But if you have problems with communication, you will always have other problems as well. And that's like a key thing, even in human being relations, but especially also in business relations, because a lot of times, because of lack of understanding the culture of the person you're talking to, or the language, or whatever it is, but there can be so many communicational problems, is if you don't understand the other point, and the other point or the other party doesn't understand you exactly, and doesn't understand what's important for you, you will always have problems. And there's like thousands of different, I think it was a very good example that you put, David. But there's also like, for example, the fruit importers that we work with, a lot of times they need the fruit in a very specific packaging, which is agreed on, and which is a very big part of the negotiations. But in Latin America, a lot of times things are not that strict, and it's okay. Like, it will be okay. We were talking about 4 kilo boxes. Those are 5 kilo boxes. It shouldn't be a problem. It's not a big difference. And then they send, even though it was agreed on 4 kilo boxes, they send it in 5 kilo boxes, and the importer is getting it, and they cannot deliver it like that to the supermarket clients that they have. So it's small things. And here in Europe, you would never understand how a company or how a person could not take it serious if you're saying, hey, we need that packaging. But it's more or less, and it's very cultural things a lot of times that both parties don't understand each other. It's why are they so strict, and why are they so laid back, and I think that's what it's very important to understand the cultural region where you're doing business with.
Yep. And so what I'm also hearing is that in addition to this communication, also this sense of empathy, really trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what is it that they're thinking, when I say this, or, coming to that understanding involves, yes, the communication and a piece of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
To move on to the next one, I know we've mentioned some of the aspects of this already as far as communication and cultural differences, but what are the main differences that you've noticed between working with distributors or partners of any kind in your home country versus those in Latin America? And what are those key takeaways or lessons that you've learned and applied? There's just different ways of working, different standards. Can you guys name, some of those things that you've come across that is just like, wow, I did not expect this, and this is something I've had to adapt to. Maybe we could start with David.
Holidays. The two big differences that we've noticed have been reaction time in response to a call or an email, not necessarily a call, but an email. Whereas in America, we might expect a reply immediately or the next day. We may not get a reply for 3 or 4 days from our Latin American partners, or I found that they tend to reply at the same time every day. So like we email our distributor in Mexico, I know I'm getting a reply at 3 o'clock that day. So you sort of learn that. But the big thing that we've had to deal with is holidays and when time is off. A lot of our customers are universities, and one of our biggest customers in Mexico closes for the month of July, and they didn't tell us that. They just assumed that we knew that they went on holiday for a month. It's like, well, they were 60 days out on their money on the first day of their holiday, and then there's nobody to get hold of to follow up, and you're mentally doing gymnastics of why aren't they getting back to me? You just don't realize they're on holiday. As soon as they get back, they'll get back to you and they'll pay you. But, so I highly recommend that anybody who does business in another country, the first thing is just look up the holidays of that country. And if you're doing business with a public institution, look up their holidays, because they'll be probably broader than the national holidays. And that right there can eliminate a lot of communication issues.
Yeah, I think there's 19 public holidays in Colombia. Daniel, what else have you seen between working with distributors, in Europe or other parts of the world and those in Latin America, as far as cultural things and complexities?
I think it ties in a bit to David with the holidays, and that if the person is on leave, no one else can jump in. And this is the hierarchical nature of companies in Latin America compared to Europe and also the US. I would say companies in Latin America, the business culture is much more hierarchical, so everything has to go through the boss. If the boss goes on holiday, then no one else can jump in, as David said. And that's also something we have to learn. We let's say we Westerners who are used to, well, if the boss isn't there, then I'll just contact the other person that I know is also kind of involved in the project. But that's usually it's not well seen, and it's most probably not going to work, because that person may not even answer your emails, because he or she will feel, well, I have to wait until my boss is back. So in the meantime, I better just not touch this and don't get back to the client. And these are also things that that you need to get used to. Like, who do you need to talk to in order to get what you need?
Definitely. Yep. And then Constantine, anything else to add as far as those differences between Latin America and other regions?
I would say there's some positive and some negative differences in the business wise. Like, I was living in Colombia for 6 years, and it was also a decision I made. I wanted to live there because there's some very positive things that I love about Latin America. One of them is that the people are very warm and nice, and a lot of times are very interested also in conversations and talk about life and talk about family and everything, even in the business sector. So that's something that I think is very welcoming, and I really like doing business like that with people that are nice, that are trying to be positive, and it's really inside them, and a lot of times they invite you to their house at one time, and it's very just a business relation, which is very uncommon, especially here in Europe, where everything a lot of times is cold, is very strict business, and you don't want to talk about anything else. And I think it also costs some Europeans to understand why do they do business in such a friendly and even informal way. But I think it's also something very positive that people are so nice, are so warm in their conversations. And the second thing that I also really like is the informalities. It's really the informal communications, is doing business also on WhatsApp and everything. They're not taking it on a too formal level. That's how you can also do fast fast development on the negotiations a lot of times because things happen quickly, but that also has, of course, their negative differences, and that's one of them. Is there's a lot of non-binding business ways and communication ways, as I just explained in the previous question, that they're just confirming a lot of times things because it's so informal. Yeah, of course we can do that. We can do that. Yeah, of course, no problem at all. But at the end, what is there and the very essence of it, a lot of times is not true. And sometimes they don't think twice about saying a yes, and that can lead to problems as well. And another thing that we found pretty annoying or difficult in expanding in the business, especially with our drinks, when we're talking to regional distributors in Colombia, was that contact persons in companies do change quite quickly. So a lot of times you have been developing a negotiation and talking to them, and at one point this person is not available anymore. Your emails just go into mail demon. You have no idea how to reach that person, so you have to start from scratch talking to the secretary that gives you, oh yeah, that person is not working with us anymore. The new person is, and then the new person is completely new in the company. You have to give it some time, and you pretty much start all over. Sometimes they can't even access to the previous emails from the previous person, so a lot of times you start all over, which can be very time consuming and very frustrating as well. And that's something that happens pretty often because there's not so much protection for the employees in general in Latin America compared to Europe, I could only say. So people switch their positions very quickly from both sides. They get fired very quickly, and they also can renounce from one day to the next one, and they're not showing up anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like what we're hearing with some of the responses to this question is that when it comes down to it, there are certain things that we just can't change about other people. In these types of relationships or any parts of our lives, sometimes it just comes down to understanding and adapting and being flexible and open on our end to make sure that this works, which is a challenge. But despite that challenge, I also really like something you said at the beginning of your response, Constantine, that you lived in Colombia, Daniel lived in Colombia for over 10 years. I'm here in Medellin myself. There is something really pleasant about and drawing to this place. Aside from the business opportunities and potential, the people here are very warm and friendly, and I think that's something that draws a lot of businesses in as well. It looks like, Dan, you had a follow-up comment to this question?
Yeah, I mean, you asked how is managing distributors different in Latin America from maybe the US or Europe? And I think another aspect that is really important for people to realize is you will have, whereas you can find one distributor that can cover all of the US, maybe even including Canada, where you can find distributors that can cover all of the European Union, which is 20, 30 countries, you will have a very hard time finding a distributor that can cover the whole region of Latin or only South America, for example. You will even have a hard time finding distributors that cover more than one country. In many cases, depends a bit on the industry and what exactly you're looking for. But Latin America is a huge area. That's also what a lot of Westerners underestimate, the distances. And they believe that when they have a distributor in Brazil or in Mexico, that company can easily cover the rest of the subcontinent. That's definitely not the case, because the region is very fractured. It's not so easy to move goods from one country to the next. It's not an integrated economic zone per se. There are different regions that are more or less integrated, but you will most probably have to find a distributor in each single country, and that's also something that is really relevant because that can increase the complexity and the time you need to invest to develop Latin America as a market, pretty much.
Yep, and that can complicate the communication between those countries as well. That becomes much more of a task if you're coordinating between multiple distributors. And if the public has any questions at this time, we would take those. We haven't seen any come in, but if there's anything that our audience wants to ask, please send those in, and we can get to those at this point. If not, we can move on with one more question that we have on the list here. But one of the major concerns that many businesses have when beginning to work with new distributors is the issue of getting paid. And David, I know you mentioned advances as one option, but how else have you gone about avoiding payment issues with your distributors? Maybe David, you could take this one.
We will do, sort of initially new relationship. We sort of make it pretty clear from the beginning, payment in advance, and that is no different than any relationship we would enter into domestically. So there's literally no difference there. After that first order, then we can start looking at either extending partial credit with a deposit, or we could start looking at potentially. I mean, we'll offer to accept payment with letter of credit, but we found that that's not that popular with the people we've talked to in Latin America. We've offered to be able to accept payment in local currency, and that has not also been that popular, although the dollar is a lot stronger now than when we initially offered that, so they might take it now. But so, I mean, we're a small business with smaller transactions dealing with smaller companies for the most part. So, I mean, we'll try to get as much information on who our distributor's customer is as to extend credit. I mean, I'm getting ready to place an order right after this for a large order for a distributor in Mexico, but she sent us the purchase orders for her customer. So we're kind of making that credit decision based on who she's selling it to. But I go back to sort of one thing that Constantine said earlier. It's kind of a gut thing. You kind of there's trust there, and everybody knows things can come up that happen that you can't foresee. But at the end of the day, you're either going to pay me or you're not going to pay me. So if you're not, why? And what can I do better? And we just sort of ease into it on a relationship basis. Here are the terms going forward, if that's good, and then, we're on our fourth order with our distributor from Colombia. We added them to our XM bank policy, and we're looking to extend 100% terms to them now. So, yeah. I mean,
yeah, and I think something you mentioned to me too before was just kind of as far as differences between Latin America and some other regions, even as far as payment terms go, that some distributors will, the expectation is maybe payment terms of as many days as 90 or 120 days. It's like, whoa, that's a lot more than I was anticipating, but that may be relatively normal based on cash flow for certain size distributors in Latin America. So it's also something to be aware of. Daniel or Constantine, anything to add as far as payment issues?
Like for us, especially for the beverage company, like I mentioned before, it was kind of like the biggest challenge we had as a company was creating the brand and getting more sales all the time. So we had to be somehow opportunistic. So we had to go some risk a lot of time to be able to scale up and to grow. And it was very, we were surprised in general how few payment problems we had in general. Also talking a lot of times in the process with friends and people and business partners in Europe, a lot of times it was very overwhelming and surprising how good the moral in general of payment were in Latin America. So it wasn't an ongoing big problem, but of course we had some problems with some clients. The biggest challenges were when together with a distributor, we were scaling up. Just to add it, we tried to do the prepayment, as David mentioned. For us, it was never an option. The beverage sector is just that competitive, and everyone is just used to long payment terms with the big companies. So nobody is interested in your products if he has to pay them prepayment. So for us, it was a challenge. We tried it, and we also in some deals we made it as a condition, and then those deals never went in. So we saw, okay, this is not the way to go. So we had to give them some payment terms. And a lot of times it was maybe in the beginning, after 2 weeks, and then if they paid well, after 30 days, and even if they paid well, maybe 45 or even 60 days, if there were never any issues with the payment. And that comes in when you then scale up with some partner and some distribution company that in those 2 months, they are doing on one order, and 2 weeks after they're doing the next order, and maybe even double the size than the first one. They're scaling up, and you really see, okay, something is going on. But from 1 month to 2 months after, maybe they have 6, 7 big invoices open, and you're really starting to worry about the payment. And we had even the cases that they were selling well, but they didn't pay our invoices, but they needed more product to be able to not lose their clients. So that's really where you're getting also a little bit back maybe to having clear terms of how much money can be open or how many invoices can be open with the client or with the guts, and saying, hey, we're really there's too much money in the game right now. You have to pay your open invoices. Until then, we will not send any more product. We had to get to that point in some occasions. And I don't know, I'm here. Is my connection still good?
Yes.
Can you hear me well? Yeah, okay, sorry. Because it was a little bit delayed, I think. Okay, and then one point, when we had these problems, we talked to some of our business consultants as well, and one of them, and that was something that we then took as a rule, was never do any big deals that can put your business in general in risk if they don't pay. So that always has to be the rule. So if it's, and it was always, maybe we're talking $1,000, $2,000 in big time, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 with a bigger order for our cases, because in the beverage business, it's more common to order every 2 weeks to have always long shelf life than doing huge orders for a whole year, you know? So if we had, and there were some opportunities of like an airline company, for example, that contacted us and was like, hey, we need for next month 500,000 bottles. And we could have been able to produce it, but it would have been a deal that we wouldn't have accepted. Maybe we would have, at the end, it didn't come in, but that was like the points where you really see, okay, if they order it and they don't pay it, because we have to prepay the bottles, the caps, the labels, the production, everything, and they pay us maybe after 90 days, but if they don't pay, we're completely broke. And that's where especially as a small company, you always have to watch out.
You are, definitely. Well, we've reached the hour. Thank you to our 3 panelists for joining us, David, Constantine, Daniel. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to share your experiences with our audience. And then thank you to the audience as well for joining us. Again, we'll send out the recording of this webinar along with the summary. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.